Y'all, this camo looks so good. It's actually criminal. This has nothing to do with the video. I just felt like I wanted to show it off at the start of the video. Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Chrono here, and welcome back to the channel. So today we'll be going over all of the new TA customizations we got for Soaring Blade Bouncer over in PSO2NGS. But if you guys are new here, like mentioned, I'm Chrono. I primarily cover PSO2 content. Would much appreciate a subscribe as we work our way towards that 10K mark, hopefully by the end of this year. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this. So this time around, Soaring Blade got, I would say, a little underwhelming PAs or tech arts customizations. I always kind of mess up the name, or TA customizations, what I call them. I was going to mess up the naming scheme for them, but we got kind of underwhelming customizations this time around. So in case you're wondering what we actually got, so ours is going to be on Roaring Pheasant the time around. Roaring Pheasant is that rolling attack that you do towards your target. It's what a lot of people say makes Soaring Blade have such good chase potential, such good mobility and things of that sort. Personally argue that that's not really the way that we would use that sort of stuff. There are other options we have available to us where we can actually not stick to the target, but continue to deal damage to the target as we move in closer. But that's besides the point. So our actual skill we got was Roaring Pheasant. Not to say that's bad. Roaring Pheasant's awesome and definitely has its place in use in our kit. But our TA customizations we got for it were kind of weird, honestly. I found myself sitting back or chatting with my buddy Kai on a stream trying to figure out, like, what do we really feel like is going to be use cases for these different variations. So I'm gonna talk about what each one does, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do a little showcase showing you guys how each one works, and then talk about which one I personally feel like is the strongest choice, and where the other ones will have some use cases, because there are some niche use cases in certain situations where I would switch to each one of these actually, given certain circumstances, and of course us finding out other boss fights, so on and so forth. So 3 customizations we got with type 1. It increases the duration and decreases distance traveled before variant attack. What this actually ends up being is just a slower version of our PA. We still kind of spin at the same rate from what I can tell. You still have the same number of hit, or you still have, basically you travel longer, you're spinning at the same rate moving forward, but you have like more rotations, right? So from what I understand, it looks like it does have more hits when you land your target, because for every swing, essentially when you're spinning towards your target is another hit. And if you didn't know, with Roaring Pheasant, as you're moving towards your target, if you're not hitting anything, when you finally do hit your target, all of your hits land at the same time. So it's kind of like it builds up and then you actually hit the target. But basically for that to work, you have to hit your target before you do the final swing of it. So you got to make sure you connect with the target with that little rolling forward, and then of course all the hits will land. This seems like its best case use scenario. Well, actually, no, I'll skip best case use scenario. We'll talk about each of them afterwards, and how they work out and where I would kind of fit them in. But that's kind of how it works. Increasing its level, all it does is it reduces the PP cost. Actually, I'll do this. It's a lot easier to see. So yeah, increases level, all it does is reduce the PP cost down to 5%, as you guys can see here. And of course, before that, it's 10%. Right now, I think ours is what? Yeah, ours is 10% right now. Starts as 20% and goes all the way down to 5%. And 5%, you're probably thinking, oh no, increased PP use. In a lot of cases, it's like 1 extra PP. It's not a big deal for the cost for most of these PAs. So like 1 or maybe 2, not a huge deal overall. But we are talking about Roaring Pheasant today. So our second one, this is the first one I gravitated towards immediately, because I saw it's like basically its use case seemed the most useful to me at the very least. But upon using it a bit more, it kind of falls in that same category of like, maybe, but we still have other options. So with this version, we have increased variant attack duration, meaning that whenever you press a PA and then press it again, it's our variant attack, it essentially makes a spin longer. So you do the little Beyblade spin in place, much longer than you normally would. And it's a good long amount of time. So it does mean that this is more useful from a DPP perspective, in case you're curious what that means. Not necessarily DPS, but damage per PP usage, meaning that, you know, you're not pressing your PA more often to get the same number of rotations. It's just 1 press extra and then you're good to go. And the last one we have is the pinion gauge accumulation. This is 50% no matter what, as you guys can see, even at level 10. All this does is reduce the PP cost. And it'd be pretty straightforward. You get 50% accumulation of pinion when you use this PA. Not terrible, not amazing, but not terrible. This one doesn't really, like, you can't really see a difference. These two are the ones you can see a difference. So I'll go ahead and show those off here for you guys really quick. Let's go ahead and make sure we're activating. We'll start with the type 1. Cool. And I'll show you guys how that looks here. All right, we can see we're locked onto our target. I'm just going to jump, that way we can kind of see ourselves move forward. If you do this from the ground, unfortunately with Pheasant, it kind of lifts you up in the air and it's a little weird. But as you can see, we're moving forward substantially slower towards our target. We still kind of get to the target eventually, right? Like, but you move forward at a slower rate overall. Turns out you actually travel the same distance. You're not moving any further or any shorter amount. I thought this would like take us further, but it just, you travel the same distance. What it feels, I mean, from my experience with it, could be wrong. It could be like a fraction further or a fraction shorter. I'm not sure how exactly it works out, but it feels like it travels the exact amount of distance with just more rotations overall. So when you finally land on your target, of course, you know, you're dealing all of those rotations of damage. Use case scenarios that I find for this would be like in setup or in precast situations, and a lot of precast fights, for example, very common with actually both Solus and MDFA. There are moments where you can just jump and start casting a Pheasant as the boss is going to land on the arena. And what'll happen is that the hit with all of the rotations will land as the boss is about to like come in contact with the arena. You'll hit all of your hits. With MDFA, it's a little bit more difficult because his arm can sometimes get in the way and you can smack it for like a ton of ones, which feels pretty bad, to be honest. I've had that happen tons of times. For something like Solus, it's actually a bit easier depending upon the situation to go ahead and get value out of that. So as long as you're paying attention, do the best you can with that, you can get some pretty good value out of it. And it is a lot of extra rotations. However, it does kind of defeat the purpose of what we would normally, actually what people would say is the usefulness of this tool, which is gap closing or mobility in general. It vastly slows your mobility down. Now, if you're like me in a lot of situations, I mean, staying on top of your target, not too difficult to do when it comes to playing Bouncer. Like realistically speaking, you can actually move around quite a bit with PAs to stay on top of your target, and just pressing neutral weapon action in between PAs is actually a damage increase. A pretty small one when you're not using Fnatic Blade, but it's still a damage increase in between your PAs. So doing something like, you know, let me show PP really quick. So doing something like, you know, Falcon while you're further away if the target's moved away, and then like kind of gap closing a little bit into them to go ahead and make sure you're in place, and then moving into a Harrier is totally fine. I don't need to like, oh, my target's far away, let me roll towards them for a setup, right? Because the thing about it is if you're locked on, you're moving one specific direction, you can't do anything about that, right? So if your target moves or is moving around a whole lot, it's pretty bad for that. And two, if you or let's say you had a bad angle, you don't want to lock on or anything like that, it's just it's a lot of control taken away for that sort of gap close. So I don't usually use it in that sort of way all the time. So if you're someone like that and you're like, hey, I only use this for precast setups, like I could see that being useful in that situation. But if you kind of subscribe to the whole like, hey, this is our good mobility, how we can stay on top of a target, then I don't feel like this is going to be a good choice for you. And our second candidate is the Type 2 version of Pheasant. So Pheasant Type 2 adjusts the variant attack. And if you're not familiar with how variant attack works with Bouncer, essentially it's when you press the skill a second time on Soaring Blades. So for example, if we were to use Harrier, if I start swinging this little throw, that's the variant attack. If I use Falcon, this little X attack, that's my variant attack. And in the case of Pheasant, when I go towards my target, press this again, this spin is the variant attack. And as you can see, it lasts way longer than it did beforehand. So you're getting a lot more mileage out of the PP that you're using for it. Now, when it comes to Soaring Blades, your choice of like kind of follow-up attacks or variant attacks, if you're on a single target, right? Let's say you're fighting something, you're using a Harrier, and you know that target's not going to sit still for the entire time. Using a Rain's not a really good choice on them because you're not going to really get your full damage. Now, in a lot of cases, what you end up using is varianted Harrier, which throws out some damage. It's like your cash out to make sure that you're still getting your full damage you possibly can, because if your target walks out of the Rain in the first couple of ticks, well, you've lost your damage. I promise I'm getting to a point here. I know we're not talking about the weapon, the skill yet, but we'll get there, right? So in that situation, our better choice is actually the variant attack of our AoE here. It's much shorter. If the target is somewhat staying still but is about to move, it's better to use that and cash out the damage that way than it would be for a varianted Harrier, right? Giving some use to that skill that we got when we got rebalanced or remade or whatever you want to call it, refreshed. Essentially gives it some use to that skill, being able to combo our variant attacks. And if you haven't played Bouncer in a while, you're probably thinking, wait, I can switch variant attacks? Yeah, you just usually don't do it unless you're hyper optimizing in most cases. A lot of situations, the PAs you have, you don't really need to combine them a whole lot, because in a lot of cases, they're perfectly fine with their aspected variant attacks, unless you want to, optimize your damage, right? It's like a case of like, oh, target's gonna move away, I can do this, and this is perfectly fine. Or it's like, hey, target's gonna stay still for a little bit. Well, this works as well because they're only moving up or down. Now, in the situation of Pheasant, if your target is going to be staying still even longer than that, a second, I always mix these up. This is actually a better choice than using something like, what was it? Is it Stork? Stork. Than using something like Stork. However, keep in mind that this ability also locks you in place, this ability also locks you in place for a very, very long time. So you got to think, well, where is my use case scenario? When would I use this? Well, in a situation where your target might be below you, you can use this to reposition down. I believe you can also use the reposition up. I'm going to double check that really quick. No, you can't. Okay, so your target being below, you can reposition down. You need to reposition up in any given situation. What you would want to use would be the variant version Stork to move yourself up a little bit. So you can use it for repositioning in that situation. But then the question comes like, why would you not just rain, right? Well, it's useful in situations where the target has a weak spot that is, let's say it's like fighting Didal, right? Didal's chest, he hunches over. Well, if I were to use rain on Didal's chest in a lot of situations, I'd hit his head, not his actual chest, right? Because it's coming from over and he's over top, hunched over his weak spot. In that situation, something like using this down would actually be beneficial for me, or just in place be beneficial for me because it's more damage than throwing this out, or even doing something like this. Maybe that causes me to move too high up in the air, right? Let's say, for example, this is going to cause me to move too much and I don't want to move. Unfortunately, that's going to move me up. Even if I try to, oh, hang on. Let's make sure we have enough PP here really quick. I always want to double check things. I always kind of second guess myself a little bit because it's like always a use case situation. Even if I'm, sitting in place, the first time I use this, it's always going to move me up. So that move me up, if it's moving me up, it's going to cause me to like miss my weak spot. In the situation like that, using the varianted attack of Pheasant's actually really, really good. A lot better than your other choices. So that's kind of where you have that use case. You're probably thinking, what about type 3, right? So why wouldn't you show that one? Because nothing actually changes with type 3 as far as like how it works. Only difference is that you gain a little bit more opinion, right? So while you're closing in on your target, in a lot of solo fights, there's a lot of setup that happens where people will just Pheasant into their target and hit them once. Getting a little bit of extra opinion on a target that's moving around a ton at the very start. Let's say, for example, you don't get a lot of good blocks on them, or they tend to whiff you a lot, or you're chasing your target down a whole lot. In most situations, you're going to build opinion if you have 20 seconds of uptime and decent PP usage, right? So like, let's see, I burn pinion right here. I pop this, and then I'm just going into my standard damage rotation. My pinion builds fairly quickly within the time frame that it has available to it. If I'm able to block things, this is me not, getting any blocks, dealing with any enemies or anything along those lines. I'm just hitting a dummy here. And as you can see, I've already built up a fourth of my pinion within the time frame that it has. Add in blocks, add in just standard stuff you would deal with when you're fighting something, and you build up pinion extraordinarily fast, like really, really fast. A big part is actually getting your blocks off and getting the counter damage. That's super, super nice. Now I can see in a situation where maybe a target's downed and you need to make sure that you can get opinion off, but realistically speaking, there's never a time you're going to be pressing, Pheasant on a target that's downed for you to be able, or for you to need to build opinion, right? This would be the first skill that I would look at, or the first tech arts customization I would look at if I need more opinion building, because Harrier also has a tech arts customization that does build more opinion. However, it isn't really necessary. Again, when you're just kind of casually playing in most situations, I wouldn't say just casually playing, just playing in general, in most situations, you're going to build opinion before you need it. In a lot of cases that you're not building opinion before you need it, either the target's not available for you to hit, or you're not getting those blocks as much as you could be getting them. Some cases you just can't. That's totally understandable. But in those situations, you're not going to Pheasant to be able to build that opinion faster. Just, it is not going to come up in most situations. So it's worth mentioning that while it is the better choice if I need to build more opinion on certain fights, like I can see this being a choice for some people in certain arcs records against certain bosses where you want to have opinion in a very specific setup. For the average player, I don't see this being a great choice. unless there's some other information we find out, right? Like we learned that, you know, against a target, it's better to use this varianted attack, which gives us extra pinion. So like you're building your pinions more easily or better overall. Or maybe there's a buff that comes out in the future where we need to make sure we have pinion no matter what every 20 seconds. And this adds an extra layer of safety. That's totally understandable. But as it stands right now, for me personally, type 2 is probably the most useful across the board. Type 1 has this, you know, has a very distinct niche usage depending upon how you personally use the PA. In type 3, I would probably relegate only to those who kind of push ARCS records in very specific setups where they absolutely need just a smidge extra of that pinion gauge to get a pinion in a very critical spot. It is the first PA I would look at of Tech Arts customizations of getting that extra pinion, you know, accumulation gauge at this point in time. In the future, we're going to get more Tech Arts customizations. It may, you know, be better to have it on a different PA at that point in time. Just keep in mind of when this video comes out. And that's pretty much about it. If you guys have any questions, maybe you guys have some data that says otherwise, I'd be more than happy to check it out in the comments below. But again, at least send me some data if you're going to disagree with me on the situation. I'd love to see the information. I've never shied away from anyone that's, you know, sending me out a spreadsheet, some reliable information. Those of you guys who know me know I love looking at that stuff. So I'll be more than happy to heart comment or check out a situation that it works well for in the comments below. Either way, like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe when you keep up with more. Let me know how you guys are enjoying your Tech Arts customizations, whether they are a bit underwhelming like me or absolute game changers, like stuff like Force. Anyway, take care, my friends. Peace out.